hey, hey, hey.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a little after 12 p.m. and we are here. Listen, I'm excited that we're having this Black Friday conversation. We have been having this conversation all month. This is our second year of doing the Black Friday conversations. And no matter what platform you're watching us on, Instagram, whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on YouTube, or you're catching this on the blackfridayconversations.com website, listen, we're excited that you're engaged. We're excited that you're listening. But we're more excited when you create a conversation around these topics. Listen, you agree, disagree, create a conversation. But I'm asking you, as I always do, come in with an open mind, ready to learn, and you're going to learn something you didn't know before. Yes, you're probably going to be frustrated. Some of you are going to be extremely excited. Some of you are going to say, epiphany, mind blown, I got it. Wherever you fall, I'm excited that you're here with us, and I am excited even more so about our guest today, a gentleman that I know from afar, respect his work, respect his literary history, respect what he's produced in the form of culture, and really pushing this conversation forward as it relates to racism, compromise, the history of America, Black lives, Black identity, a faith-based response to faith, to racism, and just all things involved. And so if you guys, one, drop your city in the chat, two, drop your platform in the chat, and give a great big welcome to Jemar Tisby. Y'all give it up for Jemar. Jemar, man, glad to have you here, man.
Are you kidding me? This made my day. Thank you for the invite, Doc.
Listen, I'm excited because, listen, each one of us, we enter into this race conversation from a different influence, man. And I can't remember what year it was. I want to say it was maybe 2018, maybe 2018, maybe 2019. But either way, when I came across your book, The Color of Compromise, and first of all, I was blown away at the scholarship, number one.
Thank you.
Two, I was blown away at the perspective, meaning it wasn't just, let me give you history, facts, and data. Let me give you perspective that really synthesized with the history, facts, and data.
Yeah.
And then, quite frankly, number three, it really blew me away because, man, it was well written.
Good.
It was well written. Because, I mean, let's be honest. A lot of the works that deal with this subject aren't necessarily well written. It's not,
Right,
you know what? Let me use a different word, brother. Well said. It was said well. And I was like, okay, at some point, I'm going to connect with this guy because these are the conversations that I'm having within my scope. So, Jemar, if you could just take a few moments and just give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you came into writing these two. I mean, you may have written more, but I know these two profound works.
I got a few of them. Selling these out the trunk. Selling them out the trunk.
Come on.
Listen, I grew up in north of Chicago in the 90s, the Bulls 6-peat era. It's no question about the GOAT.
Oh man, there's no question about the GOAT.
We talk about controversial conversations. I probably just alienated half your listeners right now. But anyway, I make no.
They know where I stand. They know where I stand. They know.
It ain't logical. It's nostalgia. It don't matter. So you know, being a Black kid in America, race was always on my mind. And my town was a blue collar town. My dad worked a middle class job at a pharmaceutical company, office job, cubicle job. All of his coworkers who were white lived in the white wealthier suburbs, and they would invite him down to their place, but they wouldn't ever come up to where we lived. So there was that. We got, profiled by police, pulled over, all of those things that a lot of young Black males in America do. But at the same time, it was everybody. It was cross colors. It was United Colors of Benetton. We had most of my friend group were Spanish speaking Latinos from Honduras, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Black guys, a few white guys. So that was my context. It wasn't until I went to undergrad at the University of Notre Dame where to this day, I believe, Black students are in the single digit percentage. And most of them are athletes, which I was not a Division I football player at Notre Dame, so that wasn't my friend group.
Right.
I was the
Now,
only black guy.
Lou Holtz fan, Notre Dame fan growing up. I mean,
Wow.
listen, you go back to
Okay.
Jerome Bettis and all those guys. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, we got to have a follow-up conversation and we see how
Yeah.
this new coach does.
Listen,
Um,
we won't
you
go there.
already,
We
you already know.
like,
Um, so I was only black guy on my floor at the dorm, and that was an educational experience in and of itself. But it was also at this time at this Catholic school I got exposed to something called Reformed theology, which is even
okay.
further right than
Okay.
white
Right.
evangelicalism.
Right.
But there was a whole lot of Bible, and I wanted to learn more. So all of that in the Christian world, my experience was wrapped up with white evangelical and Reformed Christians.
Hmm.
Then after that, things get really real. I joined Teach for America. They send me down to the Mississippi Delta on the Arkansas side. It was supposed to be.
Now, is this your first Southern? Okay. Just okay.
Yep,
Wow. Okay.
yep.
Got you.
This is supposed to be a 2-year stint. You sign up, you teach in an under-resourced school for 2 years, and then you go about life. That was almost 20 years ago, and I'm still here. So God had another plan. I was a sixth
Wow.
grade teacher, then a middle school principal. All of that's relevant because the Delta is black, most of the places. That
Right.
goes all the way back to slavery.
Right.
And that's because you need more laborers than
Correct.
owners. And
Correct.
so there's also incredible poverty. There was a USA Today article a couple of years back that named the county where I live the fourth poorest county in the entire nation. Now that's the context for my
Now,
kids.
so you and I have some tremendous context because when I was a financial advisor for about 4 years, and I was actually involved in church and ministry at that time, I
Yeah.
was living in the fourth poorest county in South Carolina with my wife and
Wow.
2 children.
Wow. And
But
you dealing with
continue,
money.
please.
That was a good space, Doc. That was a good space.
Listen.
So people are beautiful here, and there's a richness in places of material poverty that you don't understand until you go there
Right.
or you grew up there. The
Right.
community connections, the familial connections, I'll support. I was at the gas station the other day. By the way, the best food in town is at the gas station. I don't know if that's true in other places, but the
Come on.
fried chicken is incredible.
Listen.
And then I was at the gas station the other day. It was a mom and her 2 kids were walking out, and she knew the cashier and the mom knew each other. And the baby was saying, "Mom, I want some food. I want some food." And she said, I don't have that money. I can't do that." And then the cashier said, "What you want?" And she got this big box, piled it up with chicken, just gave it to him. Said, "It's on me. It's on me." And that stuff is every day. That stuff is every day. So that was the context though. But why don't she have money?
Right.
That's the deeper question. Yeah. And so I started asking that question of my faith. Why do my kids have parents who have to literally choose between paying the light bill and fixing the car? Do you want electricity at your home, or do you want to be able to go grocery shopping? So and I found in these white Reformed and evangelical circles, they didn't have a lot to say. Nevertheless, I thought I could do something. So I went to seminary at Jackson, Mississippi, and that's when things got really, really real, because I started talking about race and justice among a lot more white folks. And I very quickly learned that you can talk about it in a certain kind of way. You can talk about racism in the past tense.
Right.
You can talk about racial reconciliation if it means just get everybody together and take
Can we all just get along?
exactly that. Can we all just get along phenomenon. But if you really start talking about power sharing,
Right.
about money, about not equality but equity, then it gets dicey. So speed up. I'm still in seminary. I'm ending, and a police officer kills Mike Brown in Ferguson,
Right.
August 2014. Black Lives Matter becomes a thing. That becomes a lightning rod in the nation and in the church. I'm trying to make sense of everything just like everyone else. I find, for me, historians have the most helpful things to say. So that sets me on a journey
Okay.
to a PhD at the University of Mississippi. Is there doing coursework that I get the idea that we need to share this honestly racist history of white Christians in the United States. And people need to know just how bad it was. And then my goal was spur to action. Let's take action.
Right.
So that wasn't quick, but
That was
it
good.
was true.
But see, you provided some great context for me because, candidly, I didn't know what your demographic, history or present was. Like I didn't
For
know.
sure.
So you mentioned about Chicago. Of course, you got the rich, Black history there in Chicago.
Yeah.
You also have, some of the more recent historical difficulties, challenges, systemic poverty, those contexts. Then you've got a trip, or what was, a trip, but became, sounds like, where you would live down to the South.
Yeah.
And in Mississippi, I mean, I don't mean Mississippi of all places from a negative standpoint, but from a historical standpoint, it's like,
Yeah. 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 It's a
wow,
heck of a
that's
place to
you
be.
come. You're talking about going to the crucible. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, man, that is interesting because when I think about even my limited experience in terms of in the deep South. I've only been to New Orleans, once, and that was more recently. Of course,
Hmm.
Florida, so on and so
Hmm.
forth, Georgia, Tennessee. But I've never been to Mississippi or Alabama.
Hmm.
But have done a lot of reading and, of course, watched a lot of the documentaries and so forth.
For sure.
But I can only imagine what it's like to be there in that sense.
My guy,
And
I
go ahead,
live
yes, sir.
I live among cotton fields. Like literally. That's the Delta, right? That's what if anybody knows anything about the Delta, it's cotton country.
Right,
It's right along the river. I can, get to the Mississippi River in 2 minutes from where I am. And when I was so I live on the Arkansas side, but it really does the state lines don't matter. It's a culture.
it's a
Um,
culture.
so when I was uh, at the University of Mississippi, I was commuting an hour and a half each way, and it would be in the late fall. Cotton is blooming. So and then the history is so present and tangible here. So
Right,
I was teaching Sunday school in Jackson, Mississippi, and I'm just an intern. I haven't finished my MDiv or anything, but they have me teaching Sunday school, and I noticed this older gentleman in class week after week, and it's very odd because he would sit there with his eyes closed and just kind of nodding and moving his fingers. He was following, he was tracking along, but he would never say anything, would never ask a question. But I could tell by the way people interacted with him that they really, really respected him. So finally, I
okay.
asked one of my friends one day, I'm like, who is this guy? I mean, I don't know who he is. He never speaks up in class, but I see how people are responding to him. He says, that's James Meredith. He was the first black person to integrate the University of Mississippi. Brother is still alive, and he was in my Sunday school class. Like I got something to teach him.
Like, hey, I'm
So
glad y'all told me this after the class was over. Like,
exactly. It was but he's a very, very sweet man, very strong Christian. And his granddaughter was in my school when I was interim principal at a school in Jackson. And so it just gives you perspective that
right.
this history is not that long ago. I mean, he integrated in 1962 and he's
But
still here.
Jamar, if you could talk about that for a second, because a lot of the conversation. I mean, even think about, I think a few years ago, Mitch McConnell, is responding, and he's talking about reparations, racism, et cetera, and he's
My
like,
Lord.
no one who is alive today, owned
Own
slaves,
slaves. Yes, yes, yes.
and so why should the people who are alive today, pay for, you
Right.
know, that. Now, there's so many things philosophically and even logically wrong with that statement. I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh yeah.
logically it's not coherent, philosophically it's not coherent, but neither here nor
Like
there.
crying to
But how do you
God.
typically how do you typically respond when people say things like that? Man, racism was so far in the past, slavery was so far in the past, we're so far removed from that right now. Why are we having this conversation? What's your typical response to such a question?
It's cultural physics. Now, I'm not a math guy. I'm not even a science guy, but I do know the basic laws of motion. Objects at rest tend to stay at rest. Objects in motion tend to stay in motion unless acted upon by an
All right.
outside force, right? Culture and history moves the same way. History has a momentum to it that, unless interrupted, will continue with the same force and the same trajectory. So something could have happened 160 years ago. But unless it is acted upon by an outside force like justice movements, it will continue with energy, with momentum, with direction that it had originally. So don't talk to me about, oh, there's a legacy to all this. But here's the thing. We don't even have to go back to slavery,
Right.
because you know what happened after emancipation, which again, do we realize how deeply embedded race-based chattel slavery must have been for an entire section of the country to declare, I'm not part of this country anymore, and we will sacrifice hundreds of thousands of
Thousands of
lives
lives.
in defense of this system and this way of life, because it was more than just owning human beings. It was
Right.
the ideology and the social system, the mentality that went into it.
Right.
So
The
all
Southern
of that,
way. It was the Southern way of living.
yeah, it was in many ways an American way of living.
Right.
So Brian Stevenson, founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, I quote him all the time. He said, the South, the North won the Civil War, but the South won the narrative war. So the story that we tell about racial difference and about Black people and about white people prevailed and continues. And the reason I say that is when we talk about reparations, we don't even just have to talk about slavery. What about what happened after the
Afterwards.
Civil War, where you had nearly a century of Jim Crow, where Black people couldn't get promotions, couldn't join unions, couldn't get loans, couldn't go to colleges. So you can even just look at the 20th century, and we
Alone.
were systematically excluded from the material wealth in this country. And it was probably Mitch McConnell's daddy and granddaddy, or people like him. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So who's responsible? I just heard, give me one more.
No,
I
go
just
ahead.
heard an example. It was a preacher. It was an old clip. Maybe Fred Price or someone. And they said, imagine you're playing a Monopoly game. And one of the players starts out with $1,500, which is what the rule says.
Right.
The other player starts out with $0. And they say, let's play the game. Everybody can play the game just like everybody else. Why do you not have any money? What's the problem? And he used that as an example. After emancipation, there were no reparations. There was nothing to compensate or get Black people on their feet. And it's as if people have forgotten that to where they're like, well, why can't Black people get right? When the game has been rigged all along.
Now, see, you've opened up so many different things because one, my background is economics.
Yes,
That's my
sir.
background. So when you brought in cultural physics, number one, we all understand, those of us who study economics, that one, money is never created or destroyed. It just changes forms.
I got to hear this. Yes.
Money is not created or destroyed. When we created, quote unquote, the American dollar, that dollar existed beforehand. It just existed in a different form. So the people who create the context for exchange determine the rules for what will be considered money and what will not be considered money. Hence, a government minting a certain denomination. When we mint it, we say this is legal tender. This can be exchanged. Notice it's legal tender. It doesn't mean you can't exchange other things. It just means this is legal tender, right? Why is this important? Because if I have a building with $1 billion in it and I burn that building and all that money goes away, guess what doesn't leave? All of the influence, all of the connections, all of the
Yes.
social
Yes.
structures,
Yes.
everything that was needed to facilitate that $1 billion.
That's it. Yes.
It never dies. So if you take all the money away from all the richest people in the world, guess what? They still have all their relationships, all of their social systems, all of their institutions,
Yes.
etc., which means the ability to quote unquote create more money is readily within their reach, because all of the things that money was used is really relationships. The
There it
reason
is.
why we have money is because we want to exchange with another person. And if I don't want to have a relationship with someone else, all I have to do is restrict them from making exchange, which is
Wow.
exactly what America
Wow.
did from 1619 until quote unquote 1860. I'm sorry,
Wow.
1964. Is we're going to exclude Black people from relationships with the broader culture of America, which means they will never financially be where we are.
Unreal. Yeah.
That was designed on purpose.
Doc, your work is so important because even just in that little snippet, you're saying, money is not this mythical, magical thing. There's a logic to it. You can figure it out. You can use it to your advantage. It can also be used to disadvantage other people. And it's so important because one of the things that I say, you've heard me say it, is race-based chattel slavery. The
Slavery,
chattel part means property. The whole
property.
reason why not just slavery, but racism has been so resilient, so resistant to change, is because there's money undergirding it.
That's right.
So, what many Southern slave owners were arguing was not about human ethics. They were arguing about property rights. And they were saying the federal government cannot take my property. Oh, the property happens to be a human being. We won't get
Right.
into that.
Right.
But by law, you shouldn't be able to take and seize my property. And then going forward, after emancipation, why were Black people locked out of certain jobs, certain positions? There was so much of it that was undergirded by economics. You can't have these Black men making more money than white men. This is what got Ida B. Wells activated. So
Yes.
she was an educator, she was a teacher, and she was a writer, of course, but she was in Memphis. She was good friends with a guy who co-owned, Black guy who co-owned a grocery store. That grocery store was doing well enough that it was cutting into the business of a white grocery store
Mm.
owner. Well, of course, they manufactured some controversy about these three Black guys and basically lynched them. And then Ida B. Wells wrote about it. And that's what got her into this activist sphere, got her run out of town and out of the South
Right.
as well. But it was because of this economic component. So what you're doing, what your knowledge is just such critical information, both for the past and the present.
With you saying that, I had a conversation last year with on the Black Friday conversations with Dr. Edward Baptist, who wrote the book "The Half Has Never
Mhm.
Been Told."
Nice.
And the reason why he and I connected is because he, as a historian, is writing the history of slavery, but in his words, the economic history of
Yes.
slavery has
Yes.
always been sort of pushed down, marginalized.
Yep.
Slavery was a dying institution, financial institution. It wasn't profitable, this, that, and the third. All lies, all lies. When all of the data tells us otherwise. And him approaching the book as a historian, bringing in the economics piece, was
Mhm.
what provoked my
You
thought at such
love
a high
that.
level. Because I'm like, brother, listen, we're going to talk for 3 hours, man.
Yeah.
Because people don't, you said earlier, the underpinning of all of this is a power shift. It's all about power and the ability to control. For example, last week, one of the things that was said is that prejudice is bias with no power. So I can have a bias against or for someone, but if I don't have power to harm or hinder their quality of life, then I'm not racist.
You're just a jerk.
Racism is where I can take my bias and prejudice and then exert power over somebody
That's
and
right.
in turn hinder or harm their quality of life. So I want to bring this conversation from that with that vantage point around to the white Christian church,
Mhm.
because many of them don't want to get into this power conversation and the economics conversation
No.
and the shared power, all of these things the gospel talks about, right? Shared power, shared autonomy, community, et cetera, that basically they rejected in order to
Mhm.
continue the American way of life and repaint this false version of what Christianity looked like in America. So, from
Yep.
your vantage point with the power dynamic, talk to us about your research and your study and even what you've written regarding the white power structure and how it has hindered the dismantling of racism, if I can say it that
Yeah. So let me start being real spiritual for a minute.
way.
I imagine if I'm a white Christian, there is, as I get exposed to this history, a deep sense of shame. And I wonder, the good news I would have for white people is Jesus's grace is enough. So I wonder if many white Christians really believe the power of the gospel they preach,
Hmm,
because the gospel that we believe is powerful enough to overcome the shame, the guilt, and the grief, even of being complicit in racism. And I say, I wonder if they really believe that, because so many white Christians go to such great lengths to
yes.
deny this history,
Right.
to cover over the shame with myths about the past, about, a lot of people even today are trying
Wow.
to make a case slavery wasn't that bad. They had food, they had clothing, they had steady work. I'm not even literally, doc.
Patriarchal,
Listen,
fatherly slave masters who had benevolent care
right.
for the people under
Yes.
their charge.
Good Christian slave owners.
Sir.
It wasn't that bad. And from a spiritual lens, I think what that is, and is an attempt to avoid the shame
Right.
that comes with being complicit with the system. It doesn't mean you owned anybody. But what I try to explain to white folk is, in a system of white supremacy, if you are considered white, you passively benefit from the
Right.
system,
Correct.
whether it is not being pulled over by police or getting the job interview because of your name. There was this study. Are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal? Exact
Wow.
same resume sent in blind, and because of the name, uh, the black sounding names got, I believe, it was 50% less callbacks. Right? That's nobody. No white person who sends in a resume is intending for that to happen, but it does.
Correct.
So that's
Correct.
all I'm trying to say. So the history here, man, is there are, unfortunately, many white Christians who are honestly more tied to what they think it means to be an American than they are
Mm.
to what it means to be a Christian. Now I know that's going to be hard for some to
It's
hear, but
hard.
let
It's
me let
yep.
me
It is.
let me explain.
Unpack it. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
What we are seeing now, which has a history, is an incredibly salient, potent, oftentimes violent white Christian nationalism. And what white Christian nationalism does is equate the fate of the church with the fate of the
Fate of the
nation.
nation.
So that on the positive side, they view United States as God's chosen nation, the city on the hill, the lamp for the
Right.
whole world,
Right.
which is supposed to be the church, not a political entity called
Right.
the US. On the flip side, they see they have construed a Christian America as being white, mainly male, certainly patriarchal, Protestant Christian mainly, but they'll even accept mainline Catholics and non-Christians if you adhere to the politics
No.
and the culture. Um, and so any deviation from that is seen as undermining the identity of the nation and therefore
Nation.
undermining the Christian character of the nation.
Right.
And that goes all the way back. That goes all the way back in uh, 1915. There was a resurgence of the KKK. The first iteration was right after the Civil War. That kind of faded away due to some protests and laws. And then there was a second wave, which was many ways the most widespread and violent. This is during the Jim Crow era. White Christian nationalism crops up in the rebirth of the KKK. They go to the top of Stone Mountain, Georgia. They're
Right.
led by a former preacher, a white Methodist circuit rider. They have a ceremony where they burn a cross and they build an altar, and on the altar they put the Bible and the American flag, as if these are all holy relics of equal importance. And so I say all that because there has to be a really deep introspection and challenging of the Christian tradition that many white people have practiced.
Brother, there are several things that are popping through my mind. Number one, a gentleman that I have a deep respect for, older white gentleman. He was a instrumental part of some of our activities in my 20s, and uh, gave me a few business lines of credit that I needed at that time that I quite honestly did not qualify for in terms of length of time in business, right? And he
Mhm.
was really wanting to help, this young black guy out. We were having a conversation one day after a couple of years of relationship, and he said, "Marcus, I need to apologize to you." I'm
Mm.
like, "For what? Well, I mean, what do you mean?" He's like, "Shut the door." So I closed the door to his office. He said, "Yeah, I need to apologize to you." And I said, "Why? What's up?" And he said, "You know, I really want to apologize for what my ancestors did to your ancestors."
Mm.
Now, this is kind of out of the blue. We had some kind of cultural, racial, but it was really out of the blue. Like, I wasn't expecting this. And he said, "No, let me tell you a quick story." And I'll give the quick story here. The short version of a longer story is he found out when he went west in college that his stepfather and his step grandfather were members of the KKK. He said, "Now, Marcus, I was told when I was a kid that my stepfather and my step grandfather were honorary members of a volunteer police force to
Wow.
help the community police deal with criminals."
Wow.
He said, "That's what I was told as a boy. It wasn't until I went to college and we were learning about racial issues." And he said, "I saw when they had, of course, the hats and the
Mm.
cape and so forth." He said, "I was a kid and I saw that in my stepfather's closet."
Whew. Whew.
I'm sitting there like, what in the world? Second story, a pastor that I knew who's passed away now. He was jumped by a group of African American teenagers when he was a
Mm.
teenager
Mhm.
and beat up extremely bad in the hospital, so on and so forth, recovered, but a
Mm.
hatred for black men, just hatred. Went
Yeah.
into the military several years, served in the military, retired, got out. When he got out of the military, he made a decision: I'm either going to join the KKK or Hell's Angels.
Whoa.
He's telling me the story. So he's in California, if I remember correctly, and he gets an invite to a KKK rally, some meeting, whatever, right? And after it was over, he's like, "This is where I wanted to be. This is what I
Better
want to
sign
do."
me up.
Now,
Huh.
now check this out. Now, Jamar, this is gonna shock you now. Well, not shock you, but it'll surprise you. He got the membership application, sitting in the back, filling it out. This was in the early 80s. He's
Mm.
filling it out. And at the bottom of the form, you had to check a box indicating you were a good Christian man committed to
Wow.
Christian values.
Wow.
And here is what he says, brother. He says this: "I don't want to be no Christian."
Wow. That was the thing.
And that's how he joined Hell's Angels. He was a part of Hell's Angels for years. God saved him, filled him with the Holy Spirit, transformed his life. Da 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 da.
Shoo.
He was telling me the story. So when
You
my
had to
point
be a
is,
you had to be a good Christian to be in the KKK.
you got to be a good Christian to be in the KKK.
This is why Christian nationalism. This is what I'm saying. And I want to say a pastoral word to my white brothers and sisters who may be
Sisters.
listening. It's not because of the amount of melanin in your skin. It has nothing to do with your biology. It has nothing to do with with the way God created you spiritually. It has everything to do with what we've been talking about:
Right.
power, money, the momentum of history, And unless we interrupt it in this generation, it will continue on to the next and the next and the next. So I need folks to hear me clearly because I don't know if you are on Twitter, you're probably way too productive to spend much time on there.
Down
But
there.
there's been a recent, controversy over some of my stuff. Made it in
Oh, wow.
Newsweek, and there's been a big petition after I spoke at this college from parents and students who are saying this is
Now, you know,
critical
I'm
race
pulling it up.
theory.
I'm pulling it up right now while you're talking
Yeah.
to me.
So,
Wow.
and often the criticism is, I'm criticizing something called white Christianity, which you could also say is so very closely related to white Christian nationalism. And white
Right.
people think I'm critiquing their very being. And I'm not. I'm talking about a belief system and a social system and a system of oppression that they need to be aware of and extricate themselves from and repent of
We're
to the
right.
extent that they participated in.
Jamar, I had a conversation with a very popular conservative Christian radio host a few years ago. He and I have a pretty good relationship, to this day. And the short version of a long story is I was challenging his his assertion that America was authentically founded upon Christian virtues, values, and principles.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so my conversation with him was, I said, well, I just want to ask you one question. If that is true, why was there a need for Christian abolitionists?
Hmm.
And
What
he
do you say?
said, what? I said, just think about it. If the country and the cultural spirit of America's history is authentic Christianity, then why were the abolitionists Christians trying to eliminate slavery? Because a subgroup would not need to exist if the macro culture is
Yeah.
authentic
Yeah. It's
Christianity.
actually Christian. Yep. Yep. Yep.
And he
No,
sat
he didn't
back and
have
he said,
anything to
Mark, I said,
say.
oh, I said, bro, listen, I said, I'm just telling you that the Christianity you guys talk about that this country was founded upon was counterfeit Christianity,
There we go.
not
There we go.
authentic Christianity. And I said, I'm not saying there weren't authentic Christians at the founding
There
of
you
this country.
go. There
I'm
you go.
talking about the culture of America and the spirit that established what this country means in Western civilization, because we the people did not mean we the people, including Black people.
So, yes. So, and just to bring history into it, how could it be anything else when um, all the major denominations split prior to the Civil War over the issue of slavery? And we know the
Over.
Southern Baptists did in 1845, but what really gets me is the specific reason why they did. The specific issue was, which I write about in The Color of Compromise,
Right.
could a white Christian missionary who enslaved people in the US be a Christian in good standing and go be a missionary to countries that probably had black and brown people who, if he just crossed the border back into the US, he would have claimed he could own? And he's going to preach the gospel to them. And so they split. How could it not be a counterfeit Christianity when, in the wake of Brown v. Board in
Right.
1954, there were a lot of white Christians who were not happy about that decision?
Right.
And they came up with a theology to support their racial segregationist positions, such as G.T. Gillespie down in Jackson, Mississippi, president of Belhaven College, now university, writes a, 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 a message later turned into a pamphlet about the supposed Christian justification for racial segregation with logic that you would not let an undergraduate student get away with in a class assignment.
Right.
And he preaches this. He shares this message with a group of Presbyterian pastors who love it so much to say, hey, can we take this speech and turn it into a pamphlet and send it all around the country? How could you not have a counterfeit Christianity when so many people go to such lengths? This is why in the civil rights movement, so many white Christians were apathetic or on the sidelines. The way I open The Color of Compromise
Right.
is with a white lawyer,
Right.
and he's saying, we're responsible for this bombing where 4 little girls, black girls, are killed at a black church. He said, we didn't plant the bomb, but we didn't even let black folks in our churches. We didn't visit them. We didn't cry out, shout out to the heavens the first time a bombing happened. So I'm just saying the weight of history is heavy.
Right.
And if we want to unburden ourselves of it, then the first thing we have to do is acknowledge it's there.
Right. And in your mind, acknowledging that it's there, what is, if you were to, I guess, pinpoint what, or I guess maybe even restate, because you probably have already mentioned it, but what would you say or re-say is the reason why the typical sincere Christian or a white Christian has a problem with that?
Yeah. I think they've been so steeped in a Christianity that is so tied to whiteness that you don't know where whiteness ends and Christianity begins. It's
Wow.
cultural, it's financial, it's social. And
Wow.
to them, to propose any other way of being a Christian is to undermine the faith itself. Honestly, I think some of this is not complicated. It's not easy, but it's not complicated. How can we get pastors and church members out of their Christian cultural bubbles? You know, it's so remarkable. If they come to visit a black church, they're like, wow, I've never worshiped like that. I've never heard preaching like that. Most of the time, they love it.
Right.
And we're like, yeah, there's other ways to do and be Christian.
Christian.
And the way we set it up in I would say globally, because the US exports its version of Christianity, which is very white. Um, but the way we've set it up is that everything that white Christians do, from their books to their blogs to their conferences to their, preaching, is seen as the standard.
As the standard. And even the people they quote and cite. And from a
Many of
PhD
whom are
standpoint,
racist and slave owners and segregationists, are seen as the standard. And then everyone else, people of color, it's lower in the hierarchy. We need to understand that the church is a body with many members, all of equal importance, though we have different functions.
right?
So what would it look like to actually honor, say, the black church tradition and what we've learned about justice and fighting racism, because we were birthed in injustice and racism? What would it look like to truly honor folks coming out of a Latin American context who know poverty and injustice in a different way? What would it look like to learn from Christians from Southeast Asia, where they can't even openly practice Christianity in some places? That's all I'm getting at. And I do think there are like a
Wow.
lot of white Christians who would be absolutely flabbergasted, hopefully in a good way, to learn that there are other ways that their brothers and sisters, spiritual brothers and sisters, are practicing the faith.
Yeah. And, Jamar, when you said that, I'm thinking about, some of the people I've got some amazing uh white Christians that my wife and I know that we've added value to their family. They've added great value to our family,
Sure.
so on and so forth. And one particular person who arguably, is the most prominent, he's since passed away, but his influence still remains. Our relationship really started. We had a casual acquaintance, older gentleman, but it really started when he asked me or made this statement. He said, Marcus, I don't know what it's like to be black in America.
Mm-hmm.
More specifically, I don't know what it's like to be a black man in America.
Mm-hmm.
He said, my world, listen to this very carefully. He said, my world on a day to day basis, I have no interaction with black people, and my
Yeah.
life isn't affected by the
Yeah.
absence of black people.
Yep.
And he said, so I just don't know. And I want our relationship. I need you to help me with that. And we had some very intense conversations. And you'll find this funny. One of the things I would say to him, I said, honestly, you'll find this funny. I said, but you can't sit and watch Fox News all day and expect to understand black people.
Ah, Come on, Doc.
That's what I'm just saying.
You're
I said,
hitting it. You're
I
hitting
said, I'm
it.
not telling you what to go watch. I'm not saying CNN is the answer or MSNBC or whatever.
Yes,
All I'm
yes.
saying is, if your only source for quote unquote news and information is Fox, you don't understand Black people. Period. And I said,
100%.
let me use an
Wow.
example. I said, I'm considered an outlier as an African American male in terms of what we've been able to accomplish, in terms of the success of our businesses, the success of our life in general, so on and so forth. I mean, you're an outlier. You're an African American male PhD holder. You're an outlier. It's only what,
Yeah.
1,500 African American PhDs in the country, something along those lines. You
Right.
know, so my point in saying is we're outliers, and people will look at us and say, hey, you're successful. How can systemic racism exist? How can racism exist? Look at what you're doing. Number one, we're successful in spite of the system, not because of the system.
There
That's
it
number
is.
one.
Yes, yes.
Number two, our self-efficacy is pushing against the prevailing culture, not working in tandem with. A white
Mm.
male or a white female who expresses self-efficacy is working in tandem with the prevailing culture. They're
Wow.
not working in contradiction. We're
Yeah.
working in contradiction to the prevailing culture. And then lastly, which is what I want you to speak to, many people in the South that I've had this conversation with, they say, well, my grandfather or my father or so on and so forth, they believe they were fighting for the Southern way of life. They were
Yep.
fighting against big government. They
Yep.
were not fighting to, keep slavery. They were not. You do a masterful job deconstructing that. And I guess I probably maybe shouldn't have used that term in this context per se.
They're gonna take any term you use and flip
Listen,
it. It don't matter. It don't matter.
but you do a masterful job in the book dealing with how that narrative, came to be in the South in terms of the Daughters of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Confederacy,
Yeah.
the lost cause narrative, so on and so forth. Can you speak to that just, for a few moments?
This is so important. This is one of the reasons why I say history is never boring, because history is story. And if we can tell a good story, we can capture people's imaginations. Unfortunately, you can tell a good story that's not a good story. What I mean by that is you can tell a story well, but the content is very evil. And so what continues to happen in this country is that the reactionary forces and the racist forces tell a good story. They tell a compelling story about what it is to be an American, about what the South stood for, about the right order of things. Now, it's not a wholesome story, it's not an edifying story, but they're very effective at telling it, and they're very effective at disseminating it. So, why do we have Confederate monuments? Symbols tell stories.
Stories.
So these statues, one of which until very recently was at the entrance to the University of Mississippi, welcoming you to campus, was the statue of a Confederate soldier in the state with the highest percentage of Black people of any state in the Union. Mississippi's almost 40% Black. Um, why was it there? To tell a story. In the same city where the University of Mississippi is Oxford. There's a Confederate monument. The Confederate monument is in the center of the town square in front of the courthouse,
This is
which
in
also
Mississippi,
tells a story.
and this is where you are. This is where you are.
That's where I went to school. Yeah.
Where you went to school? Go.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, where I am, there is a Confederate cemetery with a 30-foot tall obelisk. And the inscription literally says, this monument is dedicated to hero worship of the Confederates. So what I'm saying is that's a way to tell a story.
Wow. That's a
In
way
the
to tell a
state of
story.
Mississippi, having the Confederate battle flag emblem on, the stars and bars
Right.
on the flag was telling a story. Um, and then the lost cause was a story that the South was a well-ordered, moral culture that these Northerners and federal government encroached upon. And the South reluctantly, oh so reluctantly, went to war simply to protect their way of life and be left alone. Think of Gone with the Wind,
Okay, right,
which
right.
was a romanticized story of antebellum plantation life. And you see something like Gone with the Wind, you're like, not only is that not so bad, I kind of like it. Why don't we do
Right,
that? So
right.
all I'm saying is story is so important. And
Important.
unfortunately in the US we've believed stories that are fantasies and not based in reality.
So how are you going to, like I said, how are you going to convince several 100,000 men to sign up for a war where they are very likely to lose their lives when your vision is we need to make sure slavery stays here?
Right.
That's not a compelling story.
Right.
So
It's
you've
not.
got to create a narrative of Southern heritage, a narrative
That's
of
right.
big government, a narrative of Southern way of living, to your children and grandchildren need this way of living, right? They need this. So now you've got men taking up arms, willing to go fight against, the North in this regard. To your point, I actually dropped it in the chat that a well-told lie can live longer than a poorly told
Look
truth.
at that. Look at that. That's it right there. That's what they're doing to this day. They're
Wow.
telling lies well.
So Jamar, as we kind of wind down, you talk about in the second book how to fight racism. What do you feel as if I know you've got principles in the book and so forth, but in terms of you personally, you're deeply entrenched in this. I mean, New York Times bestselling author. I mean, you're deeply entrenched. You're traveling that, and I know you come against a lot of opposition, so on and so forth. Why are you undertaking this burden? I mean, wouldn't it be easier for you to kind of just have some little fly by night conversations here and there, and building an amazing career, not subject your family and your kids? I mean, why is this a burden for you to undertake it at this macro level?
Well, I'm not as smart about money or business as you, so I had to do what I know how to do. Once you start teaching me, who knows what I end up doing? Like Jamar is out there, he own a vineyard. What are you talking about?
Oh
We'll
my
see.
gosh.
Um, so proximity has really shaped me, and being in the deep South has
Right,
really in the Delta, which I always describe it the way most people look at Mississippi as like super racist and backwards. That's the way Mississippi looks at the Delta.
okay.
Um, People don't come to the Delta. They'll even do these Southern civil rights tours. They'll go to the big cities. They'll go to Birmingham and Atlanta and some other.
Oh,
The Delta ain't got no big cities. I mean,
gotcha.
Memphis is sort of like the Delta's big city, but being here, you can't not see it, whether it's in the history or the fact that schools here are 99% black, and there's the White Flight Academy, which is 99% white and private.
Right,
um you can't not care about it because it affects home prices and whether young people stay or leave. um it's in the church, and church is starkly divided still along racial lines. So I'm steeped in it. I'm immersed in it, and to the point where even if I was to leave tomorrow, it would just be with me and in me and part of me.
right.
So I don't think there's anything super special about my spirit or my brain, but God placed me in situations around people who need a megaphone to talk about their experiences. And I hope through my writing and getting on shows like yours, we can be that megaphone.
I want to put this up on the screen. Yeah, I want to put this up on the screen because this is actually one of the. I think this graphic will sort of illustrate not only what you have been saying and what you are saying at this moment, but it will illustrate a part of the reason why I got involved in the conversation and why we are here at this juncture. So I'm going to share this, and then when you now listen, I don't think you've seen this graphic before. Maybe you have, but when you see this graphic, I know this is sort of top of head, spur of the moment. I want you to just tell me what you see when you see this graphic. Okay, so ladies and
Yeah.
gentlemen, this is not scripted. This is not anything. I mean, we're gonna find out what does Jemar see when he sees this graphic. That's what I want to put up on. So just give me just a moment, and I want you
Yeah.
to see
Take your
that.
time.
All right, share screen. Boom. Window. It's not giving me what I want there. So let's go to let's go option B. All right, there we go. B, Control S. We're coming, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, folks
Yeah.
can, if you want to keep up, you can subscribe to my newsletter, jamartisby.substack.com, jamartisby.substack.com. Also, my latest book, How to Fight Racism for Young Readers, is for kids 8 and up. We're doing an online book study every Thursday. The past videos are available so you can catch up. And the young people in your life are invited. Kids 8 and up are invited. These are kid-friendly lessons where I'm talking directly to young people. So
Yeah, and listen, we purchased this morning. Tiffany, she bought the video curriculum. She bought a
yeah.
couple other
Oh,
things that she
great.
bought for us to give away to some people in our network. So
Fantastic. Thank
yeah,
you.
we're gonna do. I mean, which I wasn't aware that was available. I was like, what? It's what?
Yeah.
Yeah, get that. Yeah, get
Gotta
that.
be intergenerational.
So I want to put this up on the screen.
Oh,
So when you see that, just what comes to mind? What comes to mind to you when you see that?
so I see the second half of the heading says mean child percentile rank for parents at 25th percentile. Does it say something above that I can't see?
No, it doesn't. No, it's just
Okay.
yeah, it's just a title. Yeah.
All the hot spots.
All the hot
All
spots,
the hot
right?
spots. Yeah. Look at the southeast.
Look at the south. Look at the southeast.
And look at the path of the Great Migration. You can see
You
Chicago,
can
you can see
you can see it.
Ohio, Detroit. You can see Native American reservations in the West. You know, yeah, swaths of Texas. You can see the darkest parts along the Mississippi River, just at the tip of Illinois going down. Yeah, yeah.
Now, here's the reason. See, this graphic that I came across in 2014 is actually what really threw me into this conversation.
Hmm.
Aware of it. I'm born and raised in Lee County, South Carolina, and you should
Mm.
know what Lee County, who,
Always the same one.
yeah, who it's named after. So
Hmm.
we get that moving forward. But professionally experienced a lot of the systemic issues again as an African American banker, African American investment advisor, African American financial advisor. Again, I saw daily the impact of white privilege and systemic racism. I saw it every day.
Yeah,
I saw white Americans who had the same credit score as an African American,
there it is.
same relative net worth in terms of what they're bringing to the table,
Yeah.
and wanting to start a business. I've seen the white couple or the white male funded. I've seen the black
Mm.
couple or the black male turned down.
Mm.
I've seen that too many times to even count. And I can go through a whole lot of other things. But moving forward, this graphic, because this graphic represents upward mobility. So there's a lot of studies on upward mobility in cities across the country. Basically means for a person who has some degree of self-efficacy, they want to improve the quality of their life. They want to do better in their life, so on and so forth. What is the likelihood of where they
Mm.
live and
Mm.
how that will impact their ability to have upward mobility? So if you're born in the bottom 25 percentile, basically, as you read from the top of the graphic, so the parents of these children are in the bottom 25 percentile.
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
the likelihood that children born to parents in that situation of their ability to have an environment that's going to support them to grow and flourish? Isn't
Woo.
it quite interesting that where the greatest concentration of African Americans are, where the greatest concentration of where Southern living or Jim Crow and Confederacy, et cetera,
Mhm.
that these cities have the lowest score in self-efficacy for a Black child born to a parent who's in that bottom 25th percentile.
Mm.
The likelihood that this child will be able to take their efficacy and it turn into a meaningful quality of life in the South, it's the worst anywhere in the country.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
How can someone look at data such as this from an independent third party and not see the residual compounded effect of systemic racism and white privilege from an economic standpoint?
Mm.
Because the graphic is communicating, if you're in these places, your likelihood of taking your efficacy and employing it, to my earlier point, we're outliers because we're successful contending with the prevailing culture,
Right. Right.
which is the typical person in general, and African Americans specifically, aren't going to have the degree of resilience to constantly fight against a system that's saying, I don't want you in power. I don't want you here. So I wanted to bring this up because, again, I just thought it provided a visual to what you were
Yeah.
saying, especially with where you are doing, or the hub of your work, and why these conversations are important. It's not just so we can culturally feel good and, Christians can all get along. No,
Right.
at the core of it, it's power, and that power is economic.
My. And I think you have a such an important role to play in this conversation because you can come up to the table with a white person or anyone really who doesn't believe all this racism stuff still is a
Right.
problem, still exists. There are lots of people who believe, but you can say, even beside from the color of black and white, let's look at the color of green. And
Come
let's
on.
look at maps like these and let's track, because there's only two explanations. Either there's something wrong with black people and we can't do money well, or there's something wrong with the system.
System.
A lot of people have unthinkingly accepted the first option.
Right.
Well, they just need to work harder. They need to change their
Yeah.
attitude. They need to do what I did and they'll be where I am. Um, but if you can expose them
Jamar,
to
are you
information
familiar?
like,
Excuse me, really
yeah,
quick. I want you to continue that thought. But are you familiar with the phrase "the culture of poverty"?
yes, yeah, yeah,
When you said that, that's where my mind went,
that's
and
right.
that whole
That's right.
narrative surrounding the reason why Black people are where they are and how they are. It's not
Right,
systemic. It's because Black people have these cultural, and what they don't want to say is inherent
right.
deficiencies that are
Yes. Well,
preventing them from succeeding in Western civilization. So please speak to that.
we absolutely. So the way, it's one of the things I say is racism never goes away; it just adapts. So there's always an explanation for exploitation. There's always a justification for exploitation. So, first, the justification was spiritual. Well, Black people and Native Americans are pagans, so they need to occupy a subservient position in society so that we can teach them the faith, which also, by the way, came with teaching them the cultural trappings of being European. So, Native Americans, you can no longer speak your language. Africans, we're going to cut you off from your society and your history and your people. Then it moved to biology. Oh, there are these categories of people like Caucasians and Negroids, and they have different brain sizes and they're therefore capable of different things in society. Then it moves on to culture. Oh, that's just the way those people are because it's this culture of poverty that they adopt, and in all of these things, whether it's spiritual or biological or cultural, places the burden of responsibility on the one who is being oppressed. And it is saying there is something inherent about who they are that puts them in that position. And so it's all a deflection from the fact that whole systems can be unjust.
Jamar, I'm blown away, man. I knew this was going to be a great conversation, but my expectations have been exceeded. I know that our audience live on various platforms and in replays, I already know what's coming. I already know what's coming, and I'm looking forward to it. I mean, there's going to be some great, great dialogue this weekend. I'm telling you. Listen, I know how these things typically work. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
man. I want to encourage every single person, even if you have disagreed with some things, get the color of compromise, get how to fight racism, get the workbooks, get the curriculums, go through it, walk through it with your children, your younger children. My daughter, who will be speaking next Friday on the Black Friday Conversations, is a freshman at Duke University,
Nice.
pre-law.
Wow.
And Jamar, it really was, if our family did not have a faith-based theology
Mm,
for racism and the Black experience in America, then I think our children would be going through a very difficult time right now.
sure. Sure. Sure.
Because our children, there were people that we listened to when they were kids, white Christian leaders,
Yeah.
and many of them over the last few years have said some very asinine,
Yeah.
ignorant, and downright just stupid statements.
Yep.
And our children came to us and said,
Mm.
"Didn't you guys have us listening to him when we were like 10 or so?
Ooh.
Didn't we used to listen to him on radio, or didn't we used to, listen to tapes? Didn't you guys?" Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
point is, if our family had not already had a cultural, spiritual, theological vantage point for this conversation, our children would be going through some very difficult times right now.
Absolutely.
I mean, our daughter
Absolutely.
is at Duke University, our son is at College of Charleston, and one's 20, well, soon to be 21, and one's 19.
Wow.
I'm just saying that we don't realize the importance of this conversation as an apologetic for the millennials and the Gen Zs. This is an
Mhm.
apologetic conversation. So if the church doesn't address this, and if we aren't continuing these conversations, we're going to continue to lose younger adults, because they're
Yeah.
not going to tolerate
Yeah.
someone talk about Jesus, and then you denying the systemic issues that are happening in this country. Even with what happened with the video with the young boy. Where was the boy? Gosh, I can't remember where it was now, but at any rate, it was, the video was sent to me with the young black
Black
kid
kid and
and
the
the
white kid
white kid.
getting
They
fight.
were fighting in the mall,
Yeah.
and they
I
took
saw
the
that.
white kid off and
Crazy.
sat him down, and make sure he was okay. Let's make sure you're good, while they're jumping on the floor and throwing this black kid on the floor and putting their knee in his back and putting him in handcuffs. Why is he in handcuffs? Nobody knows what happened. Why is this kid in handcuffs?
Yep.
You don't know what this kid was doing, but the cultural vantage point is obviously this black kid, which at that point in the video was the one on the bottom getting beat
Right.
up.
You
Forget
gonna
that he's
help
getting beat up.
anybody. Yeah.
So again, for us, it's an apologetic. It's a defense of the faith and articulating the faith in this modern context.
Amen. Amen. It stands out as starkly as the "Are you a Christian?" on the KKK form. We got to deal with it.
Brother, we got to do it. Jamar, you've been amazing. I mean, I know.
You're
Listen,
amazing. So
check out
much good
Jamar
stuff.
on listen, Instagram, Twitter, etc. Get everything he's putting out. Connect with him, and we'll look to have Jamar back with us. He's a pretty in demand guy, so we'll see if we can't get that back on the schedule for some things
Just
later
say the
on in the
word,
year.
brother.
Listen, we'll see if we can make it happen, you guys. Listen, don't forget, like, follow, share, and make sure that you're engaging others with this conversation. Okay. God bless you. We'll see you guys next Friday at 12 p.m.